All right, here we go. Kinesiology 230, Chapter 17, presentation number 10, also known as last one for this chapter. They talk specifically regarding safety considerations starting on page 470. A lot of this will be pretty straightforward, but I got to tell you there are some specifics that they look for, and they present in the book, and you'll find later on in a quiz situation or maybe test situation. They have several points that they note, and these are very familiar to you. You have pre-training evaluation, know the physical characteristics, and technique and supervision are important as always. Good surface and footwear, which sounds very familiar to what we're talking in plyometrics, but there's some specifics that I want you to commit to memory. Okay, so let's get going here. Make sure my clicker's on. All right, so sprinting is very dynamic and performed at high intensity. We already talked about that at length in terms of power and force, and also power production and power yield out of the ground, and the body has to be able to systematically process the systems in the body have to be able to process that. And these are forces that are exponentially higher than walking or jogging, and many times for many of your people, if they've not done plyometrics or running or sprinting, there'll be a process they have to learn how to become acclimated to those forces involved. And one area that the book points out are the hamstrings. And the hamstrings must be prepared to undergo extreme amounts of stress during the eccentric phase of the movement pattern, followed by nearly instantaneous concentric muscle action. That constant cycle that I mentioned before about potential to kinetic, you had that happen over and over again, I don't know how many times during a race or a game, in terms of like the muscles have to contract and relax all over. And if you think back to the basketball shot where we talked about the stretch reflex and the counter movement, being able to jump and shoot, it's kind of the same principle and same concept when we're talking about sprinting, but it's a little bit more dynamic in terms of running, or even if you're cutting and changing direction as well. But they point out the muscle's not prepared through both strength and flexibility training. Injury risk increases. I think you're going to see it somewhere else. There's several considerations specific to integrating in plyometric training into a program. The design of the program should consider the effect that strength, plyometric, and speed training have on each other. They're not mutually exclusive. Get myself out of the way here. They definitely have like a dovetail effect where they all play off of one another. You have a super hard leg day. You can't really do hard plyometrics that day. You can't really do heavy sprint work that day. You're going to be cashed out from one. You can't really work the other the next day. So you have to be able to manipulate those variables. So the book has some specific examples that you probably want to just pause me and write these down. But in general, clients should perform either lower body plyometric training, speed training, or lower body resistance training on a given day, but not more than one of these on the same day. And I agree. Then they go on further, want to say heavy resistance training plyometrics on the same day is not usually recommended. However, some athletes may benefit from complex training, which is a combination of resistance and plyometric training by performing plyometrics followed by high intensity and resistance training. I've used this methodology in my own training. I've used it with my athletes, and it's challenging in a word, but it has its place with the right population. Next up. This chart is up here for your benefit. This table shows a sample of how you can lay out during a week on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, where you do resistance training on these days, you do plyometric on these days, and speed training on these days. I would tell you that this changes with different populations. This changes in terms of goal. If you have people who work out 3 days a week, it's going to flow through and change this. It's going to flow through and change this. It just depends on the sport. It depends on the person as well. I will also tell you that with this, you can have on a Monday, if you have a hard upper body day, perhaps you can do a difficult or challenging conditioning day. If you want to do lower body on Tuesday, perhaps you're going to do more of the plyometric day like they're saying here. And then you come back with lower body on Tuesday and you work upper body plyometric, and then you do a rest on your speed development, right? So you think in terms of these variables and how you can manipulate them and lay them out. Now it becomes a little bit more complex. You're not just talking about one domain, resistance training or plyometric or speed training. You're talking about how they all tie together. And that's really the takeaway here on this chart. And it has its place and something you'll have to kind of play around with going forward as you coach your athletes or work with your clients. So plyometric exercise should be incorporated into an overall training program, including both strength and aerobic exercise. Speed training may be combined with plyometric and resistance training, but this requires careful planning to optimize recovery while maximizing performance. That sounds very familiar to something that I just said, and it has its place 100%. So as you start to implement in plyometrics and speed training into your workouts, just realize that you're bringing in two major domains, not just variables, but training domains into the equation. The variables are how far you run, how fast you run, what height box you jump over, how many hurdles you hop over. Those are your variables. We're talking broad-based domains, and they will have an effect on one another. So it's never ever strength and cardiovascular or sprint work and plyometrics. It's this. It's how they dovetail together and how they play off of one another in the context of your programming. All right, guys, that's it for presentations for Chapter 17.